This episode is brought to you by Snapple. Want to know another Snapple fact? The first hot air balloon passengers were a sheep, a duck, and a rooster. Ridiculous. Check out Snapple.com to find ridiculously flavored Snapple near you.
What's up, everybody? Back from our summer hiatus.
How was Paris? How was Paris, Courtney?
It was like
so quick. It's almost like you weren't there.
It was so quick. It was almost like I wasn't there.
Can I just have a note to all of our listeners, some of whom may not know me on a real life basis? Dripping with sarcasm is in my LinkedIn bio. So even though Courtney wanted to go to Paris, and who doesn't? He was not actually in Paris. He was in the Paris of his mind.
Paris of my mind. It's ImmaLetYouFinish on the Pantheon Podcast Network. It's show number 196. And we have a guest today, music journalist, Ira Robbins, here to talk about one of our favorite bands, a New York band, because, we are a New York show. So we're going to do a little digging into and have a great conversation about Blondie.
I'm wearing my Blondie t-shirt. You see that?
Oh, I have two of those. I have
the Marc Jacobs outlet store.
I still have my yellow one, and I still have the green one.
I have the blue one, and I have the thermal. Yeah, the Marc Jacobs outlet was the only thing I could afford of his.
And I also had the little Kim shirt, but somebody stole it. I do not know, because I know I never threw that out. One day, I think when I sent my laundry out, it never came back.
Oh my God. Well, anyway, Hi. Somebody is celebrating a birthday tomorrow.
Someone is celebrating a birthday tomorrow.
Someone hasn't gotten to the age yet where they don't want to acknowledge their birthday. There's like a sweet spot between your late 50s, 60, you can whoop-de-doo it up, and then 65 because you start getting government benefits, but you're at that sweet spot where
not really. Let me just tell you something. I'm going to be 57 tomorrow. In gay years, I'm already at 65. It's like invisible. Invisible, honey. It's I'm sir. Excuse me, sir.
Oh, this is what gay men and single women have in common, with or without cats. We're invisible. Yeah. We're invisible past a certain age.
Go into the bar and they're like, "Oh, all of our certificates are right here on this wall." I'm like, "No, I'm not here with the city.
Why is my dad here drinking with me?"
Yeah.
Anyway, because I'm known for my segues. The Olympics started last week in Paris. Speaking of Paris. I think this is the first time that an Olympics has been, or first time in a very long time that an Olympics has been held in a city, as outdoors, where the opening ceremony was not outdoors in the sense that an open air arena, like through the streets of Paris.
And this is Paris's third time hosting an Olympics.
Right, and it is a
mess.
No, I don't think it's a mess at all.
Oh, there's a lot. Have you not seen?
Well, I'm talking about the mess. Let's talk about the opening ceremony. The opening ceremony. So, okay. First off, I didn't watch all of it. I watched most of it. It's Americans have to stop looking at everything through our American lens.
It's so annoying.
The French are French. The Americans are Americans. The Italians are Italians. Does everything the French? I actually saw somebody.
It's all these faux Christian anger. It's like, it just shows you how much. It just shows you how much. When we're talking about the scene that they misinterpreted as the First Supper. It's like it shows you
Last Supper, not the First Supper. The Last Supper.
Right. The Catholic who actually took religion. And the person who goes to church every Sunday said the First Supper. Okay,
it was kids, the last
thank you. My American education.
Literally the last.
I'm proving my point. Which, fun fact, people, that's probably not how it actually looked, how it's depicted in the photo. I know you all want to be upset. I don't think it actually looked like that. But
the thing is that it's not even that. We could start with that. And first off, these are the same people who have no problem with Trump being in a tableau of the last side.
All of the things.
So people were like, why is there so much fashion in this thing? I'm sorry. First off, First off,
in Paris.
It's France.
Wait.
It's
Paris,
in
to be more specific.
Paris.
Why is there fashion in Paris? You know what? I don't know. I have no idea.
I don't know. What do they do?
Odd.
It's so weird. Odd. And also, wasn't one of the sponsors was LMVH?
Kinda, sorta.
So, you know, if you're going to have product placement, give me some dancy Louis Vuitton luggage, okay?
And Christian Dior and all the things.
I mean, it's France. So I have no problem with the fashion, though I will say, can someone just tell Ralph Lauren to stop with those stupid every year with the blazer and the jeans? I mean, come on. Come on. We are more than prep school, a Jewish man from the Bronx idea of what America looks like. Can we just stop with this?
This
every year, so boring.
This year especially, I was just kind of like, you know, and
so
wait,
boring.
They have the contract through 2028.
Oh, Jesus.
And they also evidently put a big amount of money into sponsoring the team. So that's probably another reason why they did it. But it just seems so, once again, just boring. I'm like, we can't do better than this.
Boring. Get one of those like cool young designers they have working for Target.
Yeah, but you know, they need to come
Tracy
up with
Reese or somebody.
They want the cash.
They want the cash. All right, opening ceremony.
Well, the opening ceremony.
First time a heavy metal band has ever played the Olympics.
Yeah, and you know, I didn't mind that. I've seen so many different things about Lady Gaga. I enjoyed her. I did.
Yeah.
I was like, you know, I think it's weird that you're opening up the Paris Olympics in France and you didn't open with a French artist. I mean, that was my one thing. I'm like, okay, Lady Gaga. Okay, great. But shouldn't it have been somebody French?
Well, yeah. I mean, you would think that you want to highlight your own people. So she was fine. I've kind of reached my Gaga saturation point, I think. I've kind of
I get that. Yeah, listen.
I mean, no disrespect.
It's a little Ray Moore and Flanagan, but listen, you know.
Ray Moore and Flanagan. I don't even know what that means, but I know what it means.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
I know what it means. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. All right. Okay, so that, look, all of this stuff is, they have the actual version, and then they had the, for the TV version, which is fine. The heavy metal stuff, I wasn't familiar with this band. I thought it was great. Those white heads, oh my God, Satan, that's Marie Antoinette. They were taking, as the British say, they were taking the piss out of it. I mean, they have the Liberty, what is it, Fraternity,
because that was
Liberty?
The building where she was jailed. So, and guillotined. But of course,
no, we're
good
Americans.
all Americans. Everything is satanic. If it's red, it's satanic. If you see a long table, it's satanic. It's like, satanic. How about this? This is why we need to not take the arts out of school. Right. And this is why it's really important when we used to go on field trips to go to museums and learn about the arts. You strip all of that away, and then what you have is faux Christian values that everybody just gets up in arms. It's like, and then they all fall on the bandwagon. It's like, I'm so tired of people being offended. It's like, how about this? I'm offended that you're offended. So why don't you go offend yourself and pick up a book and go to a museum and do a little research on something?
Well, I will say this, though, and that was hilarious. And like Rob Schneider, who cares about you on so many different levels? The only thing Rob Schneider is interesting about is that his daughter is, what is his daughter's name? Ella something. She's a pop singer, his daughter.
She is?
Yes. She's like a famous, Ella King? That's his daughter.
Elle King? Oh, Elle King. Yeah, okay.
Notice she doesn't talk about him at all. Mm-hmm. I will say, though, that all the people going, oh, no, this was the scene from back. Yeah, you didn't know that either, that it was a scene from Bacchus. You Googled that. But that's fine. That's fine. At least you Googled it. Figured at least you Googled it. At least you said, what the hell is going on the French Olympics? I am so confused.com. Okay, so I thought the lighting was great. I thought the weird guy running around with the torch. I love the way the torches looked. Mm-hmm. It was raining, so France, actually it doesn't usually rain in France in the summer, so they were not happy about that.
This is the first time in 70 years that it has rained during opening ceremony.
Because Satan.
Yes, Satan looked up and was like, "Oh, look, they're making fun of everything. They're celebrating me. Rain.
Yeah.
This is for you, Cameron Bure, and America."
And this is also, people also need to
And
remember
Mike Johnson, who's the Speaker of the House. Even you're the Speaker of the House. I am so tired of unintelligent people getting to fall up and have a voice and just be loud and wrong. Loud and wrong.
It would also, well, anyway, so, and also for those of you playing the at-home version, France is a deeply Catholic country, so obviously they have no problem with Jesus. All right, so opening ceremony, mixed opinions. The opening ceremony is supposed to be over the top, glitzy, paying homage to the country that is putting it on, tacky in a good way, reverent in a good way. I don't know, it was fine. It was what it was supposed to do. So the two big musical performances one was not hyped, one was hyped. Aya Nakamura was announced, and the right wing had their fucking panties in a twist because, oh my God, she's black. And I'm a fan of hers. I had found out about her, and she's the biggest selling French artist in the world. I thought that was not MC Solar. Who's our boy that we love?
Charles Aznavour.
Stromae.
No, actually, I thought it was Johnny Holiday because he's Halliday. He's huge. But now they're talking about she's the largest French. But we're talking about in the streaming era. Like she's huge. Huge.
I was disappointed. Now, for people to go, she was lip syncing. Duh, of course she was. She was singing outdoors without a band on a live TV performance. I just thought that she would she seemed very hesitant. I don't know if she's like a shake your groove thing kind of singer, but she seemed like the criticism had gotten to her and she was reining it in terms of her expression. She sounded fine, but I thought there was going to be a little more something.
But I felt the same way after that, but then I realized it's why I love Me Lin, right? It's the same thing. And then when I was speaking to a friend of mine who's French, they all loved it. And when you go online, now you're seeing everybody is recreating her choreography. And then speaking to a French friend of mine, he really pointed something out to me. He was like, if you look at French performers, they're not like the Americans. It's not explosive choreography and shaking your hair and doing all of the madness. So like her doing the minimum is kind of tracks. Like, people make fun of me for liking Me Lin, and I watch it, I'm like, people are losing their shit. And basically she raises her arm and everybody's like fainting on the floor. And I'm like, the French don't do like when they call it a France's Beyonce. So that puts the image of kinetic energy, and it really was very subdued. But when I'm on TikTok and I'm on YouTube and I'm watching all of these people, I'm talking every color, every age group, they're all recreating that moment. They loved it.
I thought she sounded great, and I thought it was a great representation. I was hoping maybe in the closing ceremonies that there be a little more rap music presentation, considering that breakdancing is in the Olympics. Yeah. But obviously,
the closing is always bigger when you have all the different artists come. So I'm expecting during the closing to really get that moment.
And maybe Stromae. Okay, but obviously the moment that will outshine the games themselves was the return of Celine. I mean, it really is. I mean, no disrespect to these athletes. What they do is extraordinary. It's always very emotional when you see these people who have devoted their lives to something that none of us can do.
Right.
So stop criticizing people.
Absolutely.
Stop criticizing. It's like you can
from home.
Nothing.
All these people, I'm like, from home. I saw this one guy last night and the people were ripping him up. He's on TikTok, looking like in his childhood bedroom, trying to read the U.S. men's team. Why are they jumping up and down and excited? They won a bronze. That's not even a gold medal. They didn't win. Yeah, it's the U.S. men have not won a team Olympic medal in 17 years. Like, they're excited. They're coming home with the medal.
TikTok is bullshit. All these people inserting their faces. There's only... Anyway, Celine, Jesus, Mother of God.
Yeah.
That we don't even, you know what? We don't even have to discuss it, only because there is nothing. I would say it's not comparable in the sense that in terms of a return and the emotional backstory, but when looking back at singers, at athletic events, as great as Whitney was, this transcends everything. This was...
This is a top Olympic moment. It's an absolute
it's a top cultural moment.
Yeah.
It's a top cultural moment. I was a little, I think she's great as a human being and stuff. She's not my style of singer. I was like verklempt.
I know a bunch of people who, are not fans, don't listen to her music. They were like, she ripped my heart out of my chest.
Oh my God. No, it was everything and the backstory. I mean, she would have been great. It was the backstory just made it that much more poignant. But I mean, she sounded great. It was the perfect song, the perfect moment, the perfect dress, the perfect setting.
It really was
everything. It was everything.
Looked beautiful, and and you could, when you look at it, you could see points in her eyes. You could see her just like the emotion.
No,
and
she was locked in.
And I was like, you know what?
You,
Celine Dion, are the icon of icons.
Yeah, and anybody, no, it was just an extraordinary moment that I don't think it was just a perfect moment, and we would be looking like idiots if we critiqued it in any way, because there's no way to critique it. There's absolutely no way to critique it.
And then we could talk about all the other fuckery that's going on, like the Olympic Village and the fact that they're running out of food. They have not had
France.
Yeah, Miss Thing, running out of food.
Oh.
They have served some of the athletes raw meat. They don't have enough protein. The athletes are complaining. They're rationing eggs. You have different countries some countries are telling their athletes don't eat the food. They're trying to bring in food. They didn't give them air conditioning. It's a disaster. The athletes are all complaining that
I'm not laughing. Yeah. I'm just laughing, but
right. That they're not getting
maybe
enough.
Maybe they're trying to recreate the Nazi occupation.
They're not getting enough calories. It's a complete mess, and they're like, we're going to try to fix it. Then we have that when they were introducing South Korea for one of their matches, they introduced them as North Korea.
Well, it's a common mistake.
And then when South Sudan was going to start their basketball game, they played the wrong national anthem. I mean, it's just been like, what is going on? And then you have what's happening in the judo sector, which is...
The judo sector?
Well, judo is a big Olympic sport.
I know that. I'm just like the judo sector.
And that has a lot of Middle Eastern athletes. The Algerian athlete missed weight on purpose and he dropped out. So for the second Olympics in a row, because the opponent was an Israeli athlete and he did not want to fight the Israeli athlete. The athlete from Tajikistan refused to shake hands with the Israeli athlete.
Tajikistan.
Same thing.
Whatever. Stans. One of the Stans.
Roberta Flack a Stan's cousin. Donnie Hathaway a Stan.
Right, Stan. Right.
And I didn't mean to be, I don't say whatever because that's rude to someone's country, but yes.
No, I know what you mean. We know.
So they're having a little bit of controversy. Oh, and do you want to know what's not happening today? Take a guess.
The Olympics? The gymnastics?
No. That's happening 12:30.
Okay.
Today was supposed to be the start of the men's triathlon. Do you want to know why the men's triathlon?
Because they can't go swimming.
They can't go in the river. Because yesterday, the practice script, first of all, the Olympics refused to have a backup. The Olympic Committee tried to force fans, you need to have a backup plan. They said they have a backup plan, but it's clear that they don't. Because they canceled yesterday's practice swim. They canceled today's start because they're like, the fecal level, the E. coli is at double the limit. So here's my thing. They're like, we're going to try again Wednesday. It's like, hi, fun fact. If your water levels keep changing that much, you need to go to the backup plan. You can't be like, all right, today's the one day you can get in this water because tomorrow the E. coli levels might be too high again. They're like, oh, well, if it doesn't happen tomorrow, we'll postpone till Friday. It's like, where is plan B? You cannot...
You've been to France, right? Have you been to Paris? Have you been to France?
For 0.2 seconds, not a real thing.
Let me make and then we'll maybe move on to someone who has made a career out of talking about poop. The French are known for many things. Mm-hmm. Organization is not one of them.
Clearly.
They are known for unbelievable food. They are known for an ability to tie a scarf that they should have an Olympics tying scarves.
So chic.
No, unbelievable. I mean,
chic.
like, it's like even people who don't have homes, who are sleeping on the street, look amazing. It's stunning. They are known for great music. They are known for great food. They are known for culture. They are known for the basis of the American Revolution. Organization, they go on strike if someone sneezes. So, I am not happy, obviously, about it. I feel bad for the athletes, but, you know, it's that. Look how quickly they folded when, you know what Homer Simpson calls the French, right? I use the phrase all the time.
No.
It's my favorite expression. I'm sorry. And I love France. Cheese-eating surrender monkeys.
I mean, you spend $4.7 billion on something. And it's the third time it's been there.
Well, they didn't
at least feed the athlete. The one thing we know is athletes need food. They didn't say that there's not even enough carbs. How's there not enough carbs for athletes?
In France, they could come to my house. I'll give them all the fucking carbs in the world. I will have carbs. You remember that there used to be there was a benefit once, underwear for India back in the 80s? I will send, it was like a downtown joke. I will send them the carbs that I've been shoving in my face. All right, should we talk about... There's not been much going on musically this week in terms of the audience. Do you want to just jump ahead to her? Because I just need a laugh. You know who I'm talking about, the Muppet. You want to talk about the Muppet? Ice Spice.
Let me just tell you something.
Well,
I'm trying to come... Listen, the new young hip-hop is a young person's game. I get it. But I'm going to need you... If you're like saying, I'm that girl, I'm the one, I got the talent, and it comes time to freestyle, and you offer to twerk instead, it's like, let's just take our credibility, crumble it up, and throw it out the window.
Did he say vocal? Now, to be fair, did he say vocally freestyle?
No, he did not. He did not say specifically Kai Cenat. Look, someone wants to. Ice Spice. She will come and she will go. She's whatever. She's adorable. She doesn't know football, which I can relate to. Whatever. No one has ever said she's a lyricist. We cannot judge. It's like judging.
Yeah, but these people act like I write my shit.
No, so maybe she does. And maybe this is all she's capable of. I mean, maybe all the album got like decent reviews, but she's limited.
It got middle of the road.
Like I said, that's decent. Yeah. It wasn't trash, but it wasn't like you have to judge her almost on the Ice Spice curve, which is she's a cultural phenomenon for God knows why. She's cute. It's a drill record. Drill is usually more emphasis from my on she talks about, she's like very sophomoric. It's like every one of her songs is like poopy and you're munch, and she's like it's like a kid making a rap record. She actually, all joking aside, when I have spoken to students about her, they're not like thrilled about her. They talk about Glorilla when they're talking about the women, So she's here and there. She'll come. It's the summer. She's, good on talk shows. She looks like Little Orphan Annie. Yeah, but it is pretty funny that, like, I want you to freestyle. Oh, wait, look at my ass.
Right. It's like, listen, and I'm not a prude. I don't care. But my energy with that was, I was like, is okay?
Okay.
It's like,
I was like, this makes no sense, but okay. Yeah, okay. Listen, it's summer. It's been hot. The Olympics are on. People aren't really paying attention. It's like, let her come out. She clearly has no interest or cultural connection to I'm using huge quotes here, the art of rapping.
Absolutely.
A lot of these younger, not all, but a lot of them don't, because this has become a means to an end. It is not an artistic expression. It is not a cultural expression. It's a Bitcoin get in there. She's very reflective of the culture in general. I mean, the culture, not hip hop culture. She's very where it's all flash and she's an influencer. She's an influencer with a record deal. Basically.
Do you know what I'm surprised that I absolutely like, and it kind of reminds me a little bit more of old school rap? JT's mixtape, City Cinderella. Have you listened to it?
No,
From
no,
the City
no.
Girls. It came out a week ago.
Okay. Oh, you told me about that. Yeah.
It's actually, I think you would listen to that and be
all
like,
right.
oh,
because I've been in a coma for the last week.
Yeah,
so.
I think that you would, as someone who wrote about hip hop and like, I think you would appreciate it. I was okay, like, you know what? This I like.
And I have no problem with stupid. Believe me, I have no problem with stupid. If you want to come out and do
I'm sitting here like Melan Farmer, and like, sometimes I listen back and I realize why none of y'all get on with it with me.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
We have to form a support group. No, but in terms of hip hop, not everybody has to be a prophet. Not everybody has to be changing the world. But it's the thing with Ice Spice is she's just not interesting.
No.
I mean,
the look is what made it interesting. The look, her look, the red hair and that thing.
Yeah, I mean, say what you will about Cardi in terms of her lyrical stuff. She's compelling. Ice Spice to me is just sort of like, she doesn't do it for me. We want to just really briefly talk about that Courtney and I, when we're bored, which is kind of all the time, and damn you reels, you're addictive. I hate them with that fucking AMSR trad wife and her like stupid Mormon husband and whatever. But Charles Barkley gives me so much pleasure. As I said to Courtney, he is the Noel Gallagher of hip-hop. I mean, not hip-hop, of basketball. You could always count on Charles to say the thing that you're like, I can't believe he said that. But he is so right. Because let's face it, Shaq does look like Shrek.
And it's really, he has so many opinions about TNT. First of all, he was the one on the air reading TNT last year, making all of them uncomfortable, and then doing interviews in the finals and getting yelled at. But you know what? We're going to take a break.
We are.
And we're going to come back with our guest, Ira Robbins, and get into some Blondie talk. We'll be right back. And we're back, kids. We're back.
Hi, Ira Robbins. Oh, look, I'm wearing my Blondie shirt, and you're wearing your new Wave shirt.
It's my functional summer polo shirt.
And I'm a black genius.
Bravo. Functional and summer. All right, let me read your intro, because a lifelong New York... Every time I talk to you or find out about something, I'm like, really? So you studied to be an electrical engineer, which means you know how to plug in equipment, so that's good. But you became a music journalist instead because you said, what can I do that'll make me even less money than an electrical engineer?
Actually, there was a little more to that. The school that I was in, they sent recruiters on campus in my senior year, and every one of them asked, like, did you have hobbies? Like, do you have something outside of engineering that you're interested in? Because engineering students are notoriously, like, dull and, like, useless. All they know about is engineering. And every one of them I said, well, I just started this little music magazine with my friend. And that was the end of the interview every time. And I kind of, by the end of school, I was like, okay, this isn't going to work. I'm going to have to find something else to do.
Well, you co-founded Trouser Press magazine in 1974, which I think I've told you this. My ex-husband's guitar was on the cover of the thing. That and 50 cents will get me on the subway. Right. In 1974, it ran to 1984. Hugely influential magazine. I was a huge fan. All music critics read your magazine. You were an editor at Video Magazine, pop music critic for the New York Newsday. That must have been when I ran into you for the first time. And an editorial director and syndicated writer. He now runs Trouser Press Books, which has published a bunch of titles, including Sweet, Wild, and Vicious, Listening to Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground, and Zip It Up, the best of Trouser Press magazine. And when we thought about, when I was in Trader Joe's, that always has the best playlist in Trader Joe's, and I heard a Blondie song and I went, Jesus Christ, man, Blondie, it sounds like it came out today. And I thought, who do I know that could talk about Blondie? Ira. So welcome to the show, Ira.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. So here's our first question, or my first question. This is so open-ended, so feel free, because you covered them. You started covering them in '76, before the first album even came out, right?
Well, I mean, Trouser Press had a funny attitude about New York bands because we thought we were like a global magazine, or at least an international magazine, and so we thought writing about bands that were only in New York that didn't have records out was kind of elitist and bullshit, so we didn't do it, which was incredibly, in retrospect, incredibly stupid, because those were the bands that all became like really big and important, and we could have told people about them and gotten points for that before anyone else did, but we didn't. So we were kind of, I mean, we knew Blondie a bit from hanging out in clubs, and I knew Jimmy Destry because I'd been in a band with him. But we didn't write a lot about them until really Jim Green, who was a part of Trouser Press, a big part of Trouser Press. He lived a couple of blocks away from where Chris and Debbie lived at the time, and so he started doing these big features for us on them, and they were on the cover, I think, 3 times.
What did you... Because I can remember the first time I heard them. We're about the same age, and I was living in San Francisco at the time and getting involved in the punk scene there, and they were just... Nobody didn't like them. I mean, everybody just glommed onto them. But what to you caught your attention about them?
Well, they hit a lot of pleasure center buttons, you know. I mean, 60s pop, British Invasion, you know, girl groups, you know, and they were like nice people, and they tried really hard. And, you know, Clem Burke is an amazing drummer, and that was always like a big connecting point for me because, you know, as a Who fan, Keith Moon was always an icon. And so, you know, Clem was like one of the few in New York at the time who could play like that, you know. And so, I mean, they were just like they were like around, you know, and I mean, the New York scene, the thing that I always make a point of explaining to people who weren't there at the time is that the New York scene in the mid-70s was really small. You know, there were like a bunch of bands and there were a bunch of fans, and they were like, it was very static. I mean, the same people went to the same shows every night. And so the idea that in some way this was going to be a big deal outside of New York just never occurred to, at least not to me. You know, we always felt like this was just going to be something for us. You know, it was like rec room fun, right? You know, it was like your friends were playing and they were cool, you know, but you didn't think like, oh my God, this is going to be a huge international success someday. You just thought, well, this is fun. I like this. These guys are cool. Let's go down CBGB's tonight, you know? I mean, so it was mostly that they, you know, they were very accessible in a pop form, which a lot of the bands at the time really weren't, right? I mean, you know, the early Bowery bands presented various conceptual diversions from the traditional. You know, I mean, Television just didn't sound like anybody. You know, Talking Heads didn't sound like anybody. The Ramones were kind of blunt. And I mean, the first time I saw the Ramones, I didn't get it at all. You know, whereas Blondie, you know, you could easily connect Blondie to the Murray the K show that I went to in 1966. You know, it was just like, it was all the same. So they were very familiar in that sense.
I think that's something, so I'm 65, so I am not of that era, the 50s era, but I remember hearing this stuff on the radio and visually. There's such a strong, and I'm not saying anything that people haven't said before, but the early New York bands, there's such a strong connection between them and the girl groups. I mean, you look at the Dolls were a girl group for all intents and purposes. The Ramones were a girl group, you know, the aesthetic. And when we first saw Debbie, Harry, and Blondie, I mean, the style of punk rock, the way we dressed back then was like rockabilly and 50s, you know, and the big glasses and the mini skirts and the big, you know, what are they called? Beehive.
Bouffant.
Well, yeah, the bouffant. Thank you. And it just really tapped into it. And it's like you said, those other groups. I mean, Television, obviously an amazing group. Talking Heads, obviously an amazing group. But there wasn't that visual focal point, and there was more of a relatability. I don't know if you agree, Courtney, or if you agree, Ira, to Blondie, in sense there was one of everybody in that group.
Well, it was Debbie to me. The first time I heard them and saw them, she was just striking to look at. And so that made me really interested in the music that they were playing and singing. Because when I saw her, I was just fascinated by how she looked. Because to me, she looked like almost like feline, like a cat. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but I'm going to dig into it more. I'm really interested in what's happening here.
One of the interesting kind of taking off with what Courtney just said, Debbie presented a kind of a challenge in the New York scene at that time, because she was a beautiful woman who obviously was sexually attractive in a way that was not at all typical of the bands of that generation. I mean, the bands that were playing CBs generally were just like schlubby looking guys, right? And they kind of tried to be schlubby looking guys, or they were like leather. So I mean, there was no female element really. Obviously Tina Weymouth was there, and there were other women on the scene, Tish and Snooki, but Debbie presented kind of a challenge in terms of how cool could new wavers be, and not like slather over her, not be like, oh my God, because when Private Stock signed them, the immediate approach was like make her a sex symbol, and yet I think in New York she wasn't a sex symbol. She was just like this really nice woman that you kind of saw play, sing with her band, So I think there was kind of an element of like, can you be cool around her and not, treat her like a sex object, which, I think most people were able to do at the time. It wasn't really until, Private Stock did the poster of her, with a see-through blouse, it was kind of like, okay, now we're off to the races.
And also that whole campaign of like, it's like sort of like Sade, like Blondie as a group, like don't only focus on her, though, like Sade, how can you take your eyes off of Debbie? You wrote something really interesting. That she really the women who were lead singers before, no disrespect, but I don't know any woman who wanted to be Janis Joplin. I mean, they want to maybe sing like her. Grace Slick was pretty cool, but most of them were like women fronting a band. Mm-hmm. There wasn't a sense, and Debbie was just, and remains just somebody who's both aloof and fabulous and super relatable at the same time. And you wanted to be, I mean, I went out and got Ray-Ban goddamn glasses because of, Debbie Harry. And she is nice, as you said. She's like an incredibly nice person, The
other thing about Debbie that's really remarkable is that I didn't realize until years later that she was the primary and almost exclusive lyricist in the band.
I wanted to talk about that.
I mean, Chris Stein sort of always portrayed sort of conveyed the character of like the mastermind, right? I mean, he was the songwriter, he was the guitar player, he was sort of like nominally the producer in certain instances. So like, you kind of got the feeling that Chris was the one who was pulling the strings. Well, that I don't mean that he was sort of like the leading creative force in the band. And then, years later, I realized, because the credits weren't at all clear at the outset, I realized that Debbie had written all the lyrics, and that sort of like really shifted my perception of her, because it makes her so much more of an agent of the band in terms of, being a leader of the band rather than just the front person.
She was a fantastic lyricist, and I think I saw a documentary, and I didn't think I saw a documentary. I did see a documentary where I believe Chris Stein brings this up as like she's horribly underrated as a lyricist, mm-hmm. and predicted the smartphone. In Picture This, pocket computer, she predicted the smartphone in the 70s. No, but she's a great lyricist. She's an absolutely fantastic lyricist. And well, anyway, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that she gets totally, kind of relegated to front person in some ways. You know?
There's an interesting sort of issue in all of pop music, which is when the singer is not the songwriter. I mean, I think there's a real dynamic there that can be explored, because there are a bunch of groups in which, the person who voices the sentiments of the song is not actually the person whose sentiments they are. The Who is a great example of that, and the Kinks. Sorry, not the Kinks. There's a bunch of other examples like that, but it's a really odd place to be, right? If you're the person who everyone thinks is saying, whatever it is that you're singing, but it's not you that's singing. It's not you that wrote it, And so I think, the idea that Debbie was the lyricist, I think makes the validity of those songs even greater. That she was really singing her own truths rather than, voicing the truths that some boy in the band was writing for her.
Do you guys think because she was, a female fronting this band, that is why America was the last to really latch on to their success, because really they broke out in Australia. They had a hit record in Australia. They toured Australia. Then they break out in the UK. And America was the last to actually grasp on to this to me, they're a quintessential New York City band. And we were the last ones to actually embrace them.
Well, America was the last to really accept New Wave. So I think they were just kind of lost in that ocean, that they were tagged as a New Wave band and therefore they were uncommercial. I think, I don't think it was because of her being the front person. I think, that was probably a plus in terms of their commercial prospects. But, America got this sort of bone about, New Wave, that New Wave was the Sex Pistols, or New Wave was, people spitting, or it was safety pins, and none of that was true. And so, it really was this weird function of the American record industry watering down what it thought could be portrayed as New Wave, but without the qualities that made it New Wave, and so we got the Cars, and we got, the Knack, and we got, bands like that. I mean, nothing against the Cars, lots against the Knack, but,
I was going to say, I'm not a huge Cars fan, but let's give them a little, he produced the Bad Brains, for crying out loud,
But, I think that was sort of a problem, was that, that the American record industry and the radio industry in lockstep, just was kind of negative about anything that they thought was New Wave. They just didn't think people would buy it. And it took the success of Blondie in England to kind of make the American record company consider that they were actually viable here.
And New Wave, I guess the irony being that New Wave was a completely made-up term like Bococo or some other Brooklyn neighborhood to make it sound like you weren't actually listening to punk.
Sort of, but it's a little more complicated than that. I think there's a real interesting history to be written about the particular evolution of that term, because in England, New Wave was everything in 76. The Sex Pistols were a New Wave band. They were not a punk band. They were a New Wave band. The Clash, Generation X, they were all New Wave bands because the British rock journalists were picking up, the French film terminology of, the Nouvelle Vague, and it was kind of the idea that this was like a change in the water, in the weather, and so the New Wave was just here's a sweeping in of new bands, but they weren't being characterized by their style, they were being characterized by their novelty, and then that term got kind of superseded by punk because of the sound of the bands, and the consensus of style, and that it wasn't really until it got to America that got twisted around again, where New Wave got applied to the bands that weren't punk, as opposed to the bands that were punk. So no one ever thought that the Heartbreakers in America were a New Wave band. They were a punk band, so it got really, the terms have been misused repeatedly in different contexts.
So pretty early, I have a question. So pretty early on, we get a legal fight between two members of the band who end up basically leaving the band. What was that about? Why did that fracture happen?
You mean Frankie and
Nigel.
Yeah.
Chris and Debbie, I think the band became sort of cliquish, and I think Chris and Debbie, who were living together at the time, had their own ideas about what the group should do, and Clem, who was really good friends with Frankie, he brought him into the band, I think was kind of on the other side. And there was a stretch when, after the success of, I think, the Auto-American album, that Chris and Debbie just didn't really want to tour anymore. And they kind of felt like it was just easier to stay home and make records. And Clem, being the kind of road hog that he is, wanted to just tour all the time. And so I'm not exactly sure why Frankie was pushed out of the band, but he was. And so, that led to a lot of bad feeling and a lot of bad blood between the various factions of the band. I know some of this because I worked with Clem on a memoir that he hasn't published yet. And, we talked about some of this stuff. And so I guess I have some insider information that I probably shouldn't be sharing because it hasn't been published yet. So.
But from what I read too, they felt like it was their band. They were on all the biggest, except for the first album, right? Or the second album after Gary Valentine left.
Yeah.
But they were on all the hits. I mean, and it was sort of this sense of, you know, they sued because they wanted to be able to. It's really weird because on one hand, if someone tells you they don't want to be your friend, why are you trying to make them be your friend?
Right.
And then I don't want to get too into it, but then why get on national television and try to like shame somebody into, because it's like, you know, like I said I didn't want to be your friend. You sued me to be your friend. You know, I'm just not that into you. Keep it moving, Frank.
Yeah, except that there's money involved. But there's money involved. You know, I mean,
yeah.
There was a share of the band that was, you know, I think was at stake. You know, I mean, look, it happened with Cheap Trick also. You know, they negotiated Bunny Carlos out of the band. You know, so, band dynamics are the weirdest thing in the world. You know, I've thought about this a lot as I've gotten older. You know, the years 17, 18 years old, you have some friends that you know from the bar or you went to school with, and you go like, hey, let's start a band. You don't really think about it. And then 40 years later, you know, you've had this entire life, you've got families, you've had, you know, experiences, you've lived different places, and you're still technically married, you know, to these 3 or 4 other people who maybe you don't like, who maybe, you know, you don't see anything in common with, you know, and yet your life and your livelihood are largely dependent on getting some agreement between all of you about what you're going to do. You know, so I mean, you know, think of The Who, for instance. I mean, you know, if Pete Townsend doesn't feel like writing songs, or if he doesn't have any inspiration, or if he's too fucked up to actually be able to write songs, then, and I'm going back to like the 70s, then, you know, Roger and John and Keith have no income. You know, they don't have an album, they don't have a tour, they're just sitting on their hands waiting for him to get inspired. And yet, from his side of the table, maybe he doesn't have any reason to want to write songs, you know, and he doesn't need the money, and why would he do that? So all of a sudden you get this you know, battle of, you know, be creative. Well, I want to earn a living. I don't feel like being creative. And so I think every band has to go through that at some point in terms of, you know, what one member wants to do versus what another member wants to do. And if they can't agree, then the business is, you know, is on the rocks. And it's a real problem, I think, because we don't see that as fans and critics. You know, we don't see inside the band. We don't know what they're thinking about in terms of you know, livelihoods or you know, careers or plans or what they're going to do with themselves.
I think just to, so when I teach a history of hip hop class, which is just hilarious anyway, and my trick question is when I ask these students, and they're all very young, is which was the number one rap? When was the first number one rap single? And they start throwing out names, and I go, Debbie Harry and Blondie, and then you play it, and they're like, they know the song. Many years ago, there was the Great Day in Hip Hop photo shoot up in that XXL had. And I always say, this is my contribution to the culture.com. I suggested inviting Chris and Debbie, and they showed up. And I will tell you that the only people that everybody wanted to meet was Rakim and Debbie Harry. And one thing that has always struck me about Blondie, and Courtney and I were talking about this, is that their willingness and their intelligence and real knowledge of other music, and it was never brought into question as, what are you doing here? Why are you in this lane? No one ever thought, why are you doing disco? Why are you doing reggae? Why are you doing soca? Why are you doing hip hop? It just was. Is that a New York thing that people just knew that they were exposed to it?
Well, you know, I mean, you're saying that nobody ever objected. The fact is that the people whose music they were being influenced by never objected, but the people whose music they were moving away from objected strenuously. You know, I mean, Blondie went disco. Oh my God, you know, fuck them. How dare they? You know, like, and you know, what's Blondie doing this rap shit for? You know, I mean, that was the white rock response to those things. You know, and big credit to the band for, you know, for having the courage to do whatever, you know, they felt like doing, regardless of how it was going to impact their core audience, because their core audience was really slow to accept what they were up to. You know, and I think that's Chris's doing largely. You know, I think Chris really just has a very adventurous mind, and, you know, and very little concern for what people think of him. You know, and so I think they went off on a bunch of tangents which have been incredibly important, both to them and to the culture at large. Why people accepted that? I think because they did it, sincerely. They weren't pretending to be something. They weren't stopping to be Blondie. They weren't being like, Blondie and DJ Easy Rock. They were just Blondie, but they had, Fab Five Freddy in the middle of their song, so it was like, I think they were smart, and I think they were sincere. I think is really what it was. I mean, I think, and they were just sort of guileless. I mean, you never felt like they were like trying to co-opt something. You just felt they were having fun.
Not with the lyrics of Rapture. You
Right.
can tell that it's both an homage and a tongue-in-cheek.
Even like Tide is High, right? Like when I heard Tide, it didn't sound like it was a parody of something. It's just a really great song that sounded nothing like anything else that they did. But I also think a part of that comes from Debbie, because if you think back to 1981, the year that she put out her solo album Cuckoo came out in July, and she hosted Saturday Night Live in February. And so she didn't have solo material yet. And she was the host and a performer. And for her musical performance, she sang Love TKO. Which is like, which should have kind of given people an idea that her solo album would be something that really sounded like a complete departure from a Blondie record.
Yeah, I think that they've always had a real open mind about what they want to do. They've just tried things, and as I said, sincerity I think is a lot of it. They just tried stuff for fun, and if it worked, it worked. I mean, there's certainly plenty of stuff on their albums that's off the beaten path. It isn't, hasn't really mattered much to people. But the ones that did, they're kind of like, in that way, they're kind of like the American Madness, right? I mean, there's a band that was able to do sort of pretty much anything they wanted, and they were just so well loved in England that people went along with it. It was just kind of like, fine, okay, you want to do Neil Diamond songs? Good, okay.
That's
well,
like the,
I'm sorry.
That's like The Hunter to me. I didn't love The Hunter when it first came out. But then years later, I have a different appreciation for that album when I listen to it now. I'm like, this isn't as terrible as I thought when I first heard it back in the 80s. And now I love it. I play it all the time.
Mm-hmm. That kind of reminded me of something, which is that on the first album, Jimmy Destry's Farfisa Organ, was probably pretty novel at the time. I mean, the Blondie were fans, and I think what they brought to the band in the outset was the same sort of goofy 60s rock music fandom that everyone around them had. Certainly I felt that same way. So, when I heard Farfisa Organ on the first Blondie album, it was like the, Question Mark and the Mysterians, and it was music it was a sound that I recognized. And I think, that became a complete cliche of new wave music, right? I mean, every new wave band for a while had a Farfisa Organ in it. I mean, I don't know if this is a fact, but it seems like maybe Jimmy Destry started that.
Well, that's what you're saying, is getting back. I was just going to jump on what Courtney's saying in terms of her solo career. Mm-hmm. Often, lead singers, in big bands, don't have huge solo careers, Mick Jagger. I can't imagine a Bono solo record. Who would want to listen to a Bono solo record? But sorry, I mean, I like you too, but I'm not interested in the thoughts and the inner workings of Bono without the band. Or a Michael Stipe solo record, for that matter. I mean, sometimes a band is a band for a reason, but why is it that she had so much goodwill? It's not like she suddenly decided to do a Norwegian death metal record. Like, why is it that she never connected as a solo artist?
It's a good question. I don't really have an answer to that. I mean,
Oh, then goodbye, Ira. We wasted our time talking to you.
No, I mean, I doubt if she has an answer to that. I mean, for one thing, I mean, she made that record with Nile Rodgers, right?
Yes.
Right.
So I mean, perhaps that was like one step over the line for her core audience. Maybe there weren't enough people willing to follow her down that particular, African American path. Maybe it was just too much for the audience that. But maybe also just that Blondie's albums were Blondie albums, and they had a whole lot of elements in them that her solo record didn't have. Maybe the songs weren't as connecting.
I was thinking of also that album cover with the nails going through her head.
Yeah.
The Geiger. That was, I remember people saying, "Oh my God, are you really determined never to sell records?"
But it was a gold album in the U.S. It did go gold here. So Cuckoo, she did and that was back when people actually bought albums. So she did. Go gold.
Which album is In Love with Love on?
In Love with Love is on her follow-up album, Rockbird. That's the album with her Chuck Lorre written song, French Kissing in the USA.
Oh, that was a hit.
Yeah, that was. I love that song.
Yeah.
In Love with Love was in the clubs. I remember hearing that all the time in the clubs. But
I Want That Man, which was on Deaf, Dumb, and Blonde. But I feel like she had some strong singles, but not always the strongest album as far as a group of material. Even though I love Cuckoo. I loved Cuckoo when it came out. I love Backfired, but it was so different. But it's weird, like this. I've tried to find a performance online. I cannot find a live performance of that song anywhere. It's almost like she never performed it anywhere.
Courtney, what you're saying, though, about singles, you could say the same thing about Blondie's albums. I mean, the first, 4 albums are incredibly strong. There's just great stuff throughout them. And then after that, the albums were pretty much, a single, a couple other tracks, and some stuff you didn't really care about that much. And I think that may be sort of the function of, creative fatigue or creative shortages. But I think maybe Debbie's album, by the time, Cuckoo came out, just really they didn't have enough songwriting, in hand to really warrant, a successful all across the board album.
Not to get too gossipy, but what the time period when Chris became so ill, they kind of retreated from the spotlight at that point, right?
They couldn't do anything. I mean, he was sick for like a year and a half. So that really put a damper on things. But there's a whole lot of other things that happened. I mean, they changed management, and they didn't tour, and then they had they had these huge hit records, and then they stopped touring. So it was kind of like that was a strange career decision.
Right. I'm gonna we're gonna be the biggest band around, and everybody and we're on Dick Clark, and
we're going to stay home.
We're going to stay home. But you said that was kind of like their nature to begin with, though, right? I mean,
not everybody loves the road. The road is hard. It's hard. Touring is a hard life. You have your artists who love it and your musicians who love it, and the others who'd rather be in the studio, maybe make a video if they do, but the road is hard. I did like their comeback when they came back in 1999, and I thought Maria was a really strong single after not having anything in the marketplace for a really long time.
Written by Jimmy Destri after he was out and into the band again.
Whatever happened to Gary Valentine?
Gary moved to England.
With him
Gary wrote this book. Have you seen this?
No. I can't see anything because it's blurry, but I believe you. Oh, I see it now. Okay.
It's called New York
Wasn't
Rocker.
he like a UFO guy, like for real?
No, he's a philosophy guy. He lives in England and he writes books about Scandinavian philosophers. It's a little super. It's not supernatural. It's a little. I'm not sure what the word is. I guess it's surrealism in some form, but yeah, he's back under his real name, Gary Latchman.
Right.
And but he lives in England and he's been there for a long time. And his departure from the band was a trauma for them as well.
That is such a great. If he wrote nothing else but "I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear," he deserves his place in the Pantheon because that really is just a stunning song.
Absolutely, and but I mean, there are a lot of contributors to the Blondie story. I mean, Jack Lee's two songs, hanging on the telephone, and I forget which one the other one is, but that was a big deal for them, and certainly the Randy and the Rainbows song, Denise.
That's my favorite Blondie.
But I mean, like what a fluke, right?
I love that song.
Like what a fluke! You have like a groovy New York Bowery band in the '70s pulling up a song from the '50s, and it's like basically it's a doo-wop song. It's not really a doo-wop song, but it's like it was a really light pop song, and
it's kind of doo-woppy. There's a doo-woppy-ish element to it.
It doesn't have the 1 4 5 6 or whatever progression.
Well, that was the thing that we were sort of talking about. I mean, there is an advantage in some ways of being old because you have your foot in rock and roll when it was in the beginning, when it had this rebellious kind of real shift. You saw the world change because of rock music, but then there's still current enough to be picking up on everything else because, I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said before, but downtown New York in the early 80s, rap and punk and new wave were all up in each other's faces anyway. So everybody was listening to everything. You went to the clubs, everybody was dancing to the same stuff. So they were there. And I think more than any other group, seen as people who were leading the charge in that direction. Maybe in the Talking Heads too. Maybe in terms of pushing the limits of what a bunch of white people on stage could do.
The other thing you can say about Blondie is that they never stopped being a New York group.
Part.
A couple of the Bowery bands really stayed New York. I wouldn't really say that Talking Heads stayed a New York group. You kind of really didn't think of them as a New York group once they were successful. They were kind of global, because their cultural influences were so broad, and they were working with so many different types of people and they toured so much. But, the Ramones certainly were a New York group, but, I guess television didn't really seem very New Yorky. They weren't from New York either, so, that kind of had a factor. Whereas, Blondie really was, and is a really New York group, although I guess, Clem comes from Jersey, and so does Debbie.
We'll extend. Outer Borough, Bridge and Tunnel. We will extend. If you when you're speaking, you have a very pronounced regional accent, we will give it to you.
Yeah.
As New Yorkers, we will let you slide if you've been here that long.
But Debbie still, I think, has that very cool girl aesthetic and chic. And when we look at her, she still has that same energy as from the first time I saw her. It reminds me of what, like, downtown New York clearly isn't like that anymore. The Lower East Side clearly isn't like that anymore. But she really represents to me a period of time in New York where you were like, wow, that girl's so cool. I know that girl. And she's never lost that.
No, you're absolutely right. I think, she really does represent the city in a good way. She's become a doyenne of New York. As opposed to being an ingenue. People are usually surprised how old she is. Because
she's in her 70s, right?
Pretty well, yeah. I think so.
Like in her 70s.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
She was older than a lot of the other people around, and you never knew it because she was so She didn't look old, but
That's what Amy said to me. She was like, the thing is, when Blondie became a thing, she was
a grown-up.
She was a grown-up.
Yeah, she'd already been on an album, the Wind in the Willows album. She'd had an album out, which, no one in New York had done that, except the Dolls.
And she was, involved. I do think, and again, I'm thinking of nothing original, but that connective thread between the 50s and the 60s and the Warhol stuff. It's like they were kind of there for all of the benchmarks of culture.
Yeah, she tucked into fashion with Stephen Sprouse, for sure. Yeah, no, they were New York at the time in the best possible way, which was that they had tentacles into everything, and everybody, accepted them into their world. You look at the video for Rapture, right? And it's like this whole, parade of cultural phenomena. It's just kind of amazing. So
the story with that was that Grandmaster Flash was supposed to be in the video and he overslept. Well, these things happen. Ira, what do you think? This is, again, I'm going for obvious questions. I had COVID. I still have COVID. So like the brain, I decide to like wait until it's all done and then jump in. I want
year 4. I'll take it. Thank you so much. Thank you.
FOMO. COVID FOMO.
I know, so FOMO. I was like, oh man, I haven't been home feeling like crap in such a long time. I want the flirt variant. I thought that was cute. I'm 65 and I want the flirt variant. What is their legacy? We've the visual, obviously. Any woman with dark glasses and blonde hair who has an attitude, boom. Charlie XCX is total Debbie Harry to me.
She's the grandchild of Debbie Harry.
Debbie Harry, But what is musically their legacy? Because they're still touring. They still, they still do their thing.
Yeah, I think endurance is an interesting factor. Chris Stein no longer tours with the group. that leaves Debbie and Clem as the only original on-stage members. Which is a little...
It's like the Pretenders then. It's just like the singer and the drummer.
Yeah. Which is a little weird, right? I mean, it's, kind of like, you want to... I mean, if you're going to go see a band, I mean, look, I guess the Rolling Stones, are down to 2, right?
Yeah.
Basically. So, I'm not entirely in favor, as a longtime rock music fan, entirely in favor of bands that just don't ever stop. The fact that you can still do it in some form, I mean, I strongly oppose the idea that the Who is the Who with Pete and Roger, so it's like, it's just, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the legacy is, maybe it's time to stop is sort of the legacy, right?
And that is the perfect place to end it. It's like, in the words of Ira, there is an end date. There is an end date, folks. There is an end date. I do feel like that way about certain people. I just saw a clip of an R&B singer who was really great, and he's on stage and he can't sing, and I'm thinking,
who?
Well, Freddie Jackson, right? Oh, and I'm like, if you can't sing, I think that even if you need money, your team has to be able to sit you down and say, it's done. We'll find you other ways to make money. I
could make a really, well, I'm not going to go into it. I'll say it off there, but I feel that way about one of my all-time favorite bands and favorite singers ever. I mean, Brian Ferry is coming up to that expert, and I love Brian Ferry, but his voice is kind of...
Isn't he in the sing-talk phase of his career now, too?
Oh,
like talking the lyrics?
Like talking the lyrics, which is fine. He can reinvent himself as French. No,
I'm going to say like Ira said, there does come a time where you have to say...
It's time to retire.
Yeah.
I
did it. I was great. They loved me. And that's it. Ira, thank you so much for coming on. It's really, and talking to us about Blondie. We're trying to focus more on some New York bands. We're a New York show and just talking about, the greatness that's come from this city. Thank you again to our guest, Ira Robbins, publisher at Trouser Press Books. Check out their latest tome, Wannabe, Hanging Out and Hanging On in Baby Beat San Francisco, a novel by David Polanoff. Out now on Amazon and everywhere where you get your books. And you know what the deal is. You can follow us on our Facebook at ImmaLetYouFinish, or on TikTok at ImmaLetYouFinish Podcast, at Pantheon Podcasts. Thank you for everybody who listens to us on the Pantheon Podcast feed. You need to follow Pantheon and all the amazing shows there. And remember to tell a friend, leave a review, share the show. We have exciting things coming up this fall, all kinds of extra content and things that'll be coming, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Waterproof records are your unsinkable tunes from the past, present, and future. What's up, everyone? I'm Jacob Givens, the host of Waterproof Records podcast. So what exactly is a waterproof record? Let's go back in time for a moment to when you were a teenager, and it's the first time you heard an album that would change you forever. Whether you're a musician, and it was the reason you picked up an instrument and started a band, or if you're just a music lover, it's the album that made you who you are to this day. You'll tell people that your life wouldn't be the same without it. It changed your DNA. So join me on the podcast where I do deep dives on some of the most influential and important albums in my life. And other times I welcome guests on the show to talk about their musical journeys and what they consider to be their waterproof record. It's time to wax nostalgic with Waterproof Records with Jacob Givens.